Hi, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the host of this show and a potential Green Party candidate for governor of Maryland in 2026. I'm using this show to highlight interesting people and ideas that help me and you to understand what is happening and what is possible. You can learn more about the campaign by going to gogreen2026.com. Guests on this show do not necessarily support my campaign or the Green Party. They've agreed to come on to discuss ideas and issues. And of course, click the subscribe button on YouTube so you can keep up to date with this podcast. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the podcast, the last one of the year of 2024. Today's episode of the podcast is very special for me. Instead of me interviewing someone, I'm going to be interviewed by my dad, Steve Ellis. My dad has a long career as a world-renowned communication expert, and he's worked in PR, politics, media, and public service, and he's traveled all over the nation and the world doing it. He's also an amazing photographer who keeps winning awards at the Montgomery County Fair, and you'll see his excellent pictures throughout our campaign. Like most people, I don't agree with my dad about everything on politics, and that makes me even more excited to have his support during this campaign. So as we get closer to our launch next Saturday, January 4th in Annapolis, I'm really excited to reverse roles today, to sit down with my dad and have him interview me about my campaign. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andy. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. I'm so excited about this. We talked about it a whole lot on our ride back from the beach the other day, and I'm thrilled that we have an opportunity to do this. And with that, I'm going to turn the roles over to you and stop being the host, start being the guest, and let you take this away.
I guess the first question is the one you get from everybody everywhere. Why are you running for governor, Andy?
Yeah, so let me try to answer this in a couple of parts. The first thing is, if you look around Maryland, on the surface, it looks like it's a state that's working really well and it's really prosperous. But that's really only true for the people for whom it's working. For the people for whom it's not working, it's an expensive place to live, transit times are long, fees are high, incarceration rates are high, and the cost of living is really astronomical for a lot of folks. And you know, there are solutions to these problems, but there's no real reason for the two parties in power in Annapolis right now to offer solutions to these problems because it doesn't make political sense for them. And so if we want to solve these problems, I think we got to look at a new kind of system, at a political system that has more parties and that has an incentive for people to make those issues of the people left behind the center of the issues. So when I look at Maryland politics and I see that, I know we need more parties. I know the two parties aren't solving. And I think the Green Party is a party that has a lot of solutions to some of these problems. And we need to see an example of what it can look like to articulate those solutions on a big stage. So I'm running because I want to give people a vision of what a different kind of politics looks like, where there are more parties and they're trying to solve the problems of the people left behind. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is the state requires small parties like the Green Party to stay on the ballot and to be recognized as a party to run candidates in top of the ticket races and get 1% every 2 years. And so we haven't really been able to do that as a Green Party with governor's races before. But I looked at this race and I thought, you know, I thought we could do it this time. And if we want to be that party that offers solutions to the problems that exist in Maryland, we need to start being able to keep ourselves on the ballot every year. So that's why I decided to run.
So politics these days can be pretty brutal. What made you decide to run? Was there some moment that you said, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, you know, so for a long time, I've been looking at the governor's race as a Green here in Maryland. It's been important for us for a while. We know we have to run in it in order to maintain our ballot status. And so in 2017, I sat down with my friend Kevin Cease, and we started to make a plan for what it would look like to run a multi-year, really well-organized Green Party campaign and to qualify for public financing, to get on the debate stage, and to really use the power of our party in the way that we thought it could. Kevin didn't get to run that year in 2017 because of some health issues, but we still had that plan, and I still had that kernel in my mind. And in 2022, when Wes Moore was running against Dan Cox, Nancy Wallace, and David Lasher, I looked at the race and I realized that, first of all, this race wasn't going to be very close at all. democracy in Maryland at that point meant that maybe Westmore was only going to win by 28 points instead of 30 points. But when I looked at that race, I realized that we needed a strong green voice in the race. And I also looked at the libertarian candidate, David Lasher, who had run a multi-year campaign, and he had been successful. He had been able to gather a lot of attention. He had been able to gather a lot of support, and he was getting his message out there more than third-party candidates normally do. I looked at the Green Party campaign in that 2022 race, and the Green Party campaign in that race had basically started in August of that year. And while Nancy and Pat had really good ideas, they didn't really have a chance to get their legs under them. So on election day, the day after election day in 2022, I went ahead and filed, and I launched an exploratory committee looking at the plan we had in 2018 and the necessity for a Green Party race that we saw in 2022. As time went on, it became very clear that even though Westmore and the Democrats had huge structural advantages in Maryland, they were governing like they were afraid of Republicans. They moved to the right on juvenile crime. They refused the progressive taxation plan, even though there was a huge deficit. And they lined up to support Israel and condemn those that criticized its war crimes against Gaza, its occupation and apartheid in the West Bank, and its aggressive attacks against surrounding nations. And when I looked at this, I knew now more than ever we needed another healthy party, and we needed one like the Green Party, rooted in peace, justice, democracy, and ecology.
Thank you. You and I have talked a lot about ballot access over the last few months. Tell us what that is and why is it important to this campaign?
Yeah, exactly. So small parties like the Green Party need to continue to remain on the ballot so that voters can register with that party, so that candidates can run with that party, et cetera. And in Maryland, there's two ways that a small party can stay on the ballot. The first is to get 1% in the top of the ticket race every 2 years. So that's president and governor. The second is to have 1% of registered voters across the state. Since the 1970s, when this rule came into place, no party has had 1% of registered voters. So really, the only way a small party can stay on the ballot in Maryland is by running top of the ticket races. If they fail to do that, and they fail to get that 1% in the top of the ticket races, then those parties need to go and collect petition signatures every 4 years in order to get on the ballot. 10,000 valid signatures across the state of Maryland qualifies a party to be on the ballot. That process is expensive, it's time consuming, it's grueling, it's dangerous. And so one of the things that inspired us about this campaign was that we want to make sure that we don't have to do that anymore. We want to make sure that our party can spend time recruiting candidates, talking about issues, talking about solutions, and things like that, instead of having to go around collecting signatures to get people to allow us to, exist, basically. So for me, ballot access is an important part of the ability to have a multi-party democracy. If we want to have more parties that are representing more people, they've got to be on the ballot, and people got to be able to find them. And so for this race, if we get 1%, we secure Green Party ballot access for the next race, 2028. And that's an important outcome for us.
Thank you. As your dad, I think you're qualified to do almost anything, but other people might want to know what qualifies you to be governor.
Well, first of all, let me say I'm qualified to run for governor, I think. I meet the legal qualifications, and that's the first step. The second thing is I think that I have a unique set of experiences between debate, transformative operational work at my job at Nielsen, and my Green Party organizing work in order to be able to give people a vision of what a multi-party Maryland would look like, and where the Green Party is one of those parties. So the voters are going to decide if I'm qualified to be governor, but I think I'm well qualified to run this race, to provide a vision of a different kind of politics, and to help have an idea of how we can have the courage to imagine a different kind of a Maryland and the power to transform it so that we end up with the results that we want.
So why should those voters vote for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think the first answer is they like me, and they think I'd be a good governor. That's why people vote. That's one of the reasons people vote a lot of times. The second is they like the Green Party. They like our platform. They like our approach to politics, and they want to see us succeed. I think they also believe that we need more parties than the two that we have now, and that in this campaign, I'm the best representative of that. Additionally, they may think one of the issues that we are raising that the other parties ignore is important enough for them to vote on. I think there's a lot of different reasons why people vote. And I think when we try to reduce it to it's all strategy or it's all pragmatism or it's all protest, we end up missing the fact that different people see the ballot box the different way of a different thing for different times. And so I think that we have a real opportunity here to give people a bunch of different choices, and I'm happy to take the votes from any of them.
You've mentioned Green Party a lot, and you've got Green Party all over your campaign documents. Why did you choose the Green Party, and could you explain to us some of the work you've done with the party over the years, both state and federal?
Yeah, sure. So I am a person who believes that political parties are important. I don't think that we can move toward a world in which we just have candidates. I think if we do that, we lose the collective benefit of a party that can collectivize people's power. And for me, the Green Party is the party that most closely aligns to my views. It has a long-term commitment to supporting grassroots movements, to supporting community mobilization, and to supporting peace, justice, democracy, and ecology. So I'm a person who believes that parties are essential, especially if we want to represent the voice of people who are often not represented. And I think that the Green Party is a party that has been in Maryland for 25 years. We have a lot of experience, and we have a great national platform that captures a lot of the issues that I believe in. So my experience with that, and I've been a member of the local Green Party steering committee. I've been a co-chair at the city level and the state level. I've worked on several ballot access campaigns, as we mentioned before, at the state level. I've also worked on national committees to help with the presidential campaign support, to help with ballot access, to help accredit new Green parties, and to help us recruit down ballot candidates across the country. I believe that it's important as we build up the capacity of the Green Party to use my skills and my interests and things like that in order to make the party better, to make it stronger. The Green Party has been around for 25 years here in Maryland, and that's a really long time for a small party. Small parties tend to pop up for a little while, address one issue, and then go away. And the reason that a party like the Green Party has been around for a quarter of a century is because I think there are people who are really committed to the idea, the vision, and the values. And I'm one of those folks, and I'm gonna help out where I can at the state, local, and national level to make sure that not just my candidacy is strong, but so is the party. Because I think we need a party if we want to have the ability to imagine a new world and the power to transform the current world into that world.
Well, can you appeal rather to non-Greens, to Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, others?
Yeah, absolutely, we will. So let me first off say we will absolutely campaign to everybody, but we do have a party building focus. And I think it is important for us to spend some time reaching out to Greens across the state, partially because we have a primary. And in July of 2026, Greens will get to decide if I'm the governor nominee or not for the Maryland Green Party. So I can't ignore those folks. I need to get their support in order to be the candidate, just like the candidates of the Democrats and Republicans have to win a primary. But beyond that, our party also has the lowest turnout rates amongst the recognized parties in Maryland. So it's important for me to reach out to Greens so that we can have more people register as Green and more turnout as Greens. Our turnout in the 2024 election was about 51%. The Libertarians had 59%. The Democrats had 74%. The Republicans had 79%. I'd love to see Green turnout be in that 79% like the Republicans are, or in that 74% like the Democrats are. So yes, we are going to campaign to people other than Greens, but we're also going to do a lot of work to organize and mobilize Greens. Now, beyond that, we're going to have a 24 county strategy. We want to be in every county in Maryland. I think oftentimes the Democrats and Republicans sort of segregate themselves into the places where they're strong and then put their resources there. And we don't want to do that. We want to go everywhere. We want to talk to everybody. And we want to be willing to have conversations across the state of Maryland. So we will be this year campaigning in 24 different counties. Next year, we'll be campaigning in 24 different counties. We want to visit campuses all over the state. We want to talk to Democrats, Republicans, libertarians, unaffiliated voters, and let all of them know what our vision for a multi-party Maryland is that's rooted in peace, justice, democracy, and ecology.
You mentioned earlier that there are parts of the state working and parts that may not be working. What do you see, Andy, as the three major challenges that we as Marylanders face?
Yeah, so I think the first one is the economy, economic mobility, and the cost of living. And I think this is a macro issue and a micro issue. We're facing a several billion-dollar deficit coming up in the next couple of years, and we're going to need to solve that problem. At the same time, cost of living is very high here in Maryland, and that's fine if you can afford it. But if you can't afford it, it's very easy for people to fall behind very quickly. And I think that limits social mobility, that limits people's ability to move from one class location to another, and to really be able to enjoy the benefits of the state of Maryland. So our economy, I think, is at a macro level and a micro level a major challenge facing the state of Maryland. We've got to solve it. We've got to figure out new solutions, and we can't keep doing the same thing. The second thing I would say is energy and the environment. Maryland is really going to have a hard time meeting the energy needs of a growing, of a sort of thriving suburban and urban population like we have right now, because we're a small state. So there's not a lot of place to put windmills. There's not a lot of place to put solar farms. And as we move forward with it, we're also not building new coal plants. We're not building new, fossil fuel plants. So we're going to have to figure out these challenges about energy. And this is especially true as the state's data and technology economy gets more data intensive, builds more AI and things like that. There's going to be a lot of demand on energy. And we simply don't have the ability here in Maryland to easily meet that. The second part of that is the environment. With all of the waterfront land that we have and all the coastal land that we have, a lot of our communities are any storm away from a massive flood or from rising sea levels or things like that. And I think that's going to incredibly cost more and more money as we go forward over time to make those communities resilient and to help them recover when natural disasters do happen. So I think those two things, energy and the environment, pose a real challenge to Maryland, and we're going to need new kind of thinking and new kind of solutions to get out of it. The last one that I would highlight here is criminal justice and the legacy of mass incarceration. So not just when Martin O'Malley was governor, not just when Martin O'Malley was mayor, but certainly when he was, Maryland went through a period where they locked up a lot of people for a lot of charges that other states would consider pretty small. We have some of the highest Black incarceration rates in the nation, and we have one of the highest Black populations in the nation. So we have a whole chunk of our population that is dealing with the effects of mass incarceration, and that has effects not just on individuals, but on communities, on cities, on towns, and things like that. And so we need to figure out how to deal with that legacy. We need to figure out how to get as many of the people who were in for charges that they could be let out on out, and we need to figure out how to repair the communities and the people who've been damaged by that legacy. So I think these three things, economy, and energy and the environment, and criminal justice, pose real challenges to Maryland right now.
Some view challenges as opportunities, but let's leave that aside. And what do you see as as three major opportunities that our state has?
Yeah, so I think Maryland has done a good job by investing and making a multi-year investment in education. The blueprint for education is the kind of thing that we should be doing, because that helps to address that social mobility, and that makes sure that the people who poor and working class and middle class folks have access to the highest quality schools that we can provide. So I think the education investments that Maryland has made pose a huge opportunity. They draw people to live here, they draw young families here, they draw people to come and study here and things like that. And I think we need to continue to make those investments so that we can address some of the opportunities, some of the challenges that we have. The second one I would say is grassroots organizing. One of the things that I've found when I go all over Maryland, whatever the issue is the ability of communities to come together and advocate for things in order to change the conditions of their community. This is the thing I think that works here almost better, that works here and has the potential to work here better than I've seen work in many other places. And as you know, I've traveled around the country. I've got to see New York, California, Vermont, Wyoming. And I think here we have communities with a tradition of activism and with a spirit to make sure that they understand what needs to change in order to make their communities better. And I think if we can mobilize those folks and give them great resources, the opportunities are limitless. The third thing I would say is I think we have a real possibility here to have a multi-party democracy at the state level. Multi-party democracy is more about compromise and less about power. It's more about consensus and less about winning. And I think that really helps us to address many of the challenges that we face. Because we already have a 3-person General Assembly set up, a district, 3 people in each General Assembly district, I think we have the opportunity to explore some forms of democracy that work in the rest of the world. Things like proportional representation and things like that would allow minoritarian voices to have more impact, to be heard more often. So structurally, we're set up well to make some great reforms in that area. And I think if we can make reforms to our democratic system and we can continue to invest in education, that will allow the people who are doing grassroots and community work to have outlets in order for to fix things, and also have the opportunity to learn new skills and to put those to good use in the service of the state of Maryland and their communities.
Green Party has a reputation, maybe earned, maybe not, of being more progressive even than the Democratic Party. But you've been talking earlier about reaching other people. What message do you have for conservative voters in Maryland?
Yeah, so I think there's some very important things that we're going to agree with conservative voters on, but there might be some things that we disagree on as well. But I think a couple of things that I want to highlight that I think we agree on. I think we agree on the need for direct democracy. Maryland is a state that doesn't have the ability to have statewide referendum. And a lot of states do have that. A lot of states allow people to be able to sign petitions and get something on the ballot as a constitutional amendment. We don't have that in Maryland, which means that all of our constitutional amendments have to go through the Democratic General Assembly and the governor. And I think conservatives and Greens and more progressive folks agree that that's a mechanism that we should have more access to. I think another thing is a lot of the Democratic Party's approach to balancing the budget is often to increase user fees, to increase registration fees, and to increase some of those type of things that get passed on, really regressive revenue generation strategies. And I think we agree with a lot of conservatives that those regressive revenue generation strategies are not good and that they should be ended. Now, we may disagree about what the right strategy is, but I think we're going to agree that the user fees are wrong. I think we would also say that there need to be less giveaways to big corporations and developers. I think that both parties in a lot of places really appreciate the giveaways to big corporations and developers. But in Maryland, that's mostly a thing that the Democrats do and champion. And I think that there's a lot of conservatives who think that their tax dollars should not be going to a corporation like Marriott that's going to end up laying off a bunch of people with those tax breaks. I would also say that I think we agree that there needs to be more investment in small businesses, and especially in some of our smaller towns and rural communities. Those small businesses are the heart of a functioning community, and we need to make sure that there's investments in those folks instead of just investing in the big corporations that are trying to gobble up land and real estate and all of that. And finally, I think we agree that there need to be transparency with state dollars. We may not agree on how the state dollars get spent, but I think we both often object to the opaque budgets that Maryland has that, don't make it so that it's easy to figure out what's happening or to hold people accountable for that. Now, look, we're going to disagree on a lot of things too, but a multi-party democracy like we're talking about is much better for folks who are on the outside, who are minorities in the political sense. It increases the incentive for compromise and increases the incentive for collaboration. And I think that would be not bad for conservatives in Maryland to have somebody to compromise with and to coalesce with around certain things of agreement, as opposed to the current situation where they only get is whatever the Democrats want to give them. Now, I say that to say we're also going to have some things we disagree about. We're going to disagree about some justice issues, some social justice issues. We're going to disagree about who should be taxed and how we should spend that. But those debates are okay to have. And I'm not afraid to have those discussions and debates with conservative folks or with liberal folks.
So what would you say to Democratic voters who might say that a Green Party candidacy, especially an effective one, which you'll probably have, will be a spoiler and take away votes from the Democratic governor candidate?
Yeah, I mean, look, Democrats have a 2-to-1 voter registration advantage in Maryland. They have all of the statewide executive offices. They have a decades-long veto-proof majority in the General Assembly, and they have the executives of the top 8 population counties. So if people are not happy with the way that Democrats are governing, that's all on Democrats. Democrats need to figure out amongst themselves why they can't use those structural advantages in order to be able to ensure that they never have a close election again. So that's the first part of it is, this is not a 50-50 state like we look at the national election. This is a 2-to-1 state where Democrats have an overwhelming majority. And if they have concerns, they should address those concerns. The second thing I would say is we're starting very early and we have a clear set of issues and priorities. And if Democrats see those issues and priorities motivating voters to defect from the Democratic Party and potentially vote for a Green, well, they have 2 legislative sessions in 2 years to start acting on those priorities. My guess is if we identify a priority and they act on it, that issue is going to go away. And the voters are going to be less interested in our campaign than they would in going back to the Democrats. And finally, I would say this: in a system where there are only 2 parties that are allowed to be healthy, the threat of spoiling is how third parties exert power. It's how they get the other parties to change course and how they get them to change outcomes. And this is especially true when by law, as I mentioned earlier, third parties have to run top of the ticket races every 2 years. And if the concern about spoiling is real, then Democrats could do a lot of things. They could pass ranked choice voting for executive representations. They could have proportional representation for legislative races. They could also change the ballot access laws so that we didn't have to run a governor's candidate or a top of the ticket candidate every year. There's a lot of opportunity here. And if there's any Democrats who want to talk to us about what some of these legislative fixes are in order to take away the spoiler effect, we're happy to talk with them.
Let's come down to some regional issues. The watermen in our state had a long tradition of working in the Bay and making a living and feeding the state and the East Coast. But they've had some issues lately, both environmental and political. What do you have? What message do you have for these folks?
Well, this is an issue that I really am excited to learn more about during the course of the campaign. I have some understanding of it, but I want to get to meet some of the watermen, get to work with the people who work the water, and understand that more. That being said, when it comes to health of the Bay, there's some pretty straightforward things that have always been the answer, and we've always simply needed the political will to implement them. So we need to decrease agricultural and chemical runoff into the Bay. We need to control development in a way that allows the water to be protected. We need to plant more trees. We need to protect forests. We need to build rails instead of roads whenever we can. We need to upgrade septic and sewer systems, and we need to regulate polluters. These type of things have always been the path forward to make sure that the Bay is healthy and that the water is maintained as a vital source of the economy, but leisure and ecology as well. Beyond that, I think we're going to need to make sure that we're helping to protect the immigrant workforce that does a lot of this water work at this point, and we're going to need to make sure that employers can guarantee that the folks can stay here, and that the people who are doing the work can guarantee that they and their families are not going to be deported in Trump's mass deportation. So again, this is an issue I want to learn more about. but the environmental parts of it are straightforward and have always been pretty straightforward. And we just have to have the will in order to get those solutions implemented. The immigration part of it, I think, may be a little bit newer and a little bit more specific to this administration, but we're going to have to work with communities, employers, state and federal agencies in order to protect the people, in order to protect the businesses that rely on that immigrant labor.
What would you think, Andy? What would be your position on increased state funding for the metro system in the DC area?
Absolutely, we need to do that. I mean, the DC metro system, I think the DC metro system is a good example of what a regional transit approach looks like. We need to have more funding for it. We also need to have more funding and more support for a regional approach in Baltimore. Baltimore does not have the same luxury that DC has in having a WMATA right now, and everything runs through the state. And that means that our mass transit priorities are treated differently than DC. So yes, we need to increase funding for WMATA. We need to increase funding and support for a regional transit authority in the Baltimore area. And we need to build more transit across the state. We were in Frederick a couple of weeks ago, and we met a guy whose main issue was that he can't use the train, the MARC train, to take his kid down to DC on the weekend to visit the museums and things like that. And his experience is not unique. People who live out in Frederick, Hagerstown, Cumberland, people who live in Annapolis, people who live on the shore don't get to take advantage of the mass transit that we have in the Washington and Baltimore area. And if we want a state that works for everyone, those folks also have to be able to have access to mass transit. So yes, we need to fund WMATA. Yes, we need to invest in the Baltimore area, but we also need to invest mass transit dollars across the state so everybody can have access to it.
What message would you have to African-American communities in inner city Baltimore?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that we need to understand is that Black neighborhoods in Baltimore matter, and they need to matter as a course of policy. We need to focus on the necessities that any community needs to be healthy. We need to focus on making sure that there are good, stable, family-supporting jobs. We need to assure that there's public safety and that they can live in a safe community. And we need to assure that there's justice for past wrongs in order to make amends for those things so that communities can repair from the damage that's been done. We also need to focus on community repair and reinvestment. A lot of Black communities were devastated by the war on drugs in Baltimore. And not even just folks who were involved in the drug trade, but folks who lived in communities that were targeted by the drug trade saw their economies devastated, saw their community fabric devastated, and saw their community institutions devastated. We need to make it a priority to invest in reinvesting in those communities, repairing that damage, and allowing those communities to reconstruct themselves again as healthy places where people can live and thrive. Finally, I think we need to say your votes matter. I think one of the worst problems in Maryland right now for Black residents in Baltimore and places like Prince George's County is that there's only one party that has political power in those places, and folks are forced to funnel into that one party. By having a multi-party system, I think we allow people like the Green Party, people like the Udema People's Progress Party, people like the Libertarian Party, and others to compete for those votes in a way that allows Black votes to matter and to be consequential in determining outcomes, not just be a measure of how much they support the Democratic Party. And so I think those three things, making sure that we say that Black neighborhoods matter, Black communities that have been damaged in the past need to be focused on to have repair and reinvestment, and making sure that democracy is a tool that is available to Black communities in Baltimore and Prince George's County and across the state. I think those things are significant and important.
You mentioned earlier the high cost of living in our state. And I think I read the other day where a lot of seniors in Maryland are moving out of the state to states with less high taxes, Delaware, North Carolina, Virginia even. What message do you have for seniors who are paying high property taxes, but maybe no longer have kids in school? And, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so the Comptroller's State of the Maryland Economy report last year spent a lot of time taking on this question. And I think that the answer that the Comptroller came to, and that is largely right, is that's kind of going to happen. People are going to leave here once their kids are out of school, once they're ready to retire, those type of things, and they're going to move to states with lower taxes. They're going to move to places where they don't have to pay as much. And I think there may be some things we can do to address that, but as long as Maryland is a state that believes in investing in K through 12 and in higher education, that it believes investing in mass transit, people are going to leave once their kids get out of school. I don't think we should kick them out, but I also don't think that we should change much of our policy in order to try to keep folks here, because we're never going to be a state based on our size and our structure that can afford not to charge income taxes. It's not going to be how it works. And so, I think part of Maryland's future is to make sure that people who are younger folks who do have children come move here, raise their families here, send their kids to our great state colleges. And then if they leave at that point, we wish them the best. I just don't know that this is a problem that we are going to be able to solve when other states like South Carolina, Tennessee, Delaware are not charging taxes and have different priorities. So it makes sense for folks whose kids are gone and have benefited from Maryland's great schools to then move on to somewhere else that works better for them at that time in their life.
I'm not moving back to Tennessee.
Fair enough. And I appreciate that you all are choosing to stay here. And I think that's an example. A lot of folks do like the way that it is here, even if they understand that the cost of living is high. Other folks do want to move to Tennessee or do want to move to South Carolina, and I think we should wish them well on their way. And I think we should also encourage more younger and newer families to move here, set up roots here, and make sure that this is their home.
You've been active and visible in issues that deal with professional sports teams and the private sector. You think that Maryland should fight to keep the Commanders in Maryland?
So I think the Commanders, I spent a whole bunch of time talking about the Orioles last year, and it's not just because I live in Baltimore, but I think the Orioles and the Commanders are really different situations. The Commanders moving back to RFK is a lot different than the Orioles moving to Nashville or to Portland or to Salt Lake City or something like that. So if the Commanders want to move back to RFK, I think there's a lot of fans that would remember that fondly. I remember when you and I used to watch games when the team was good, and they were at RFK, and that was, it's not too far for us to get there. It's still part of the region, and so I say that to say, if the price tag for keeping the Commanders here is anything like the price tag was for keeping the Orioles and the Ravens, $600 million each, I think that's too high of a price to pay. Now, if the Commanders were interested in working out some public ownership situation where the state of Maryland and Prince George's County had a stake in the success of the billion-dollar enterprise, then I'd be more interested in that. But if it is $600 million to a private owner so that they can stay here instead of moving back across the river to D.C., I'm going to let them go. I'm going to let them go to D.C., and I'm going to let the state have $600 million back.
During the last election, you were chair of a working group that was opposing an effort to decrease the size of the Baltimore City Council. Tell us about that. You were successful in your efforts, but tell us about why you did that and why you were so adamant about it.
Yeah, so I served on the Baltimore City Charter Commission last year. I was nominated by my city council person and appointed by Mayor Brendan Scott to be on the once a decade Baltimore City Charter Commission. And we looked at a lot of issues that were facing the city, and one of those issues was a petition-based charter amendment sponsored by David Smith of Sinclair Media. David Smith is a sort of right-wing media mogul who owns the Baltimore Sun and owns TV stations all across the country. And he's been using charter amendments, which are the sort of citizen referendum form in Maryland, in order to restructure city government in the way that he would like to see it done. this particular charter amendment would have slashed the size of the city council from 14 district members to 8 district members, and would have increased the size of each of our city council districts by about 30,000 people. Baltimore is a city that really needs its city council folks. They help fill in the gaps when the executive agencies are not necessarily following up on things and are not being good stewards of the public good. And they also help us help our representatives in government in a way that allow each of our diverse communities to have representation. So we knew this was a problem. We knew it was bad that he was coming for it. And we knew that it was a daunting challenge in order to be able to take it on, because only one charter amendment has failed in Baltimore City in the last 25 years, and the other 49 have passed. So it's sort of taken as a political conventional wisdom that all of these things pass. But we knew we needed to beat this one. So starting in February of last year, we started reaching out to elected officials. We started reaching out to people in advocacy organizations and labor organizations and things like that, and raising the alarm about it. And as the year went on, those labor organizations formed their own coalition to address the issue. The Democrats and their political machine got behind the issue. The media got behind it. And at the end of the day, we won. We beat it. We put together a successful coalition that defended democracy from right-wing attack. And we did it by making sure that we let everybody know that it's okay to imagine beating one of these things. And now we need to put the work in and get it done. So, at the end of the day, it preserves the status quo. It preserves Baltimore City as it is. But it's defense from outside attack, and it's the power of coalitions, the power of imagining something different, and the power of showing up and getting the work done in order to convince voters that we don't need to shrink our city council because one of Trump's propagandists thinks we should. In fact, we should defend our democracy and make it stronger by building new coalitions.
What kind of effort do you think Maryland should have as a state to support electric vehicles, charging stations, all the infrastructure that goes with that trend?
Yeah. So first of all, yes, we should incentivize as much electrical vehicle transition as possible. I think it's important to move away from fossil fuel-based vehicles, and I think it's important to make sure that Marylanders can participate in that transition. Marylanders who can afford cars right now get tax incentives, sometimes doubling up state and federal tax incentives to buy electronic vehicles. I think that's important stuff. I also think that we need to invest in electronic vehicle charging infrastructure across the state so that people feel more comfortable making the switch. That being said, I don't think electronic cars are the only solution to the problem that we have that is both transit-based and environment. I think we should also incentivize the purchase of things like e-bikes and e-scooters, just like we do e-cars, so the people who can't afford to take advantage of the electronic car tax credit can still have an electronic vehicle that can get them around town, that can do things. So the e-bikes are awesome. A lot of them can go really fast. You can get groceries in them. They're a good means of transport for people who live in places that have the road infrastructure to support it. I also think that we can't have a conversation about EVs at the expense of a conversation about transit. So we need to build out mass transit so less people need cars. I don't think we're ever going to be, New York City or anything like that when it comes to trains. But the more trains and buses that we have and the more modes of transportation we have for people to live their lives, get to work and not need a car, the better off we are. And I think that includes a multi-mode strategy of cars, bikes, mass transit, all of that. So yeah, let's invest in EVs, but let's not limit our focus just to electronic cars. Let's expand it and make sure everybody has what they need.
As governor, what would you do, or what would you push to the legislature to encourage across the board innovation in Maryland, be it technology, be it transportation, be it agriculture? Innovation is important. How would you help to support it and encourage it?
Yeah, so I think innovation is absolutely essential, and I think it's a thing that we really need to to focus on here. And I think we need to focus on it at a local level. And I think we also need to think about it as not dependent on the federal government or the military. So what does that look like? I think that looks like investing in some tools that would help us to have what we call a solidarity economy. That means more worker-owned businesses. That means a public bank that is able to provide capital to businesses that may not be able to get it on the private market, but at the same time still have an opportunity at innovation. I think that also means more incubators at the local and county level. And I think it means thinking about how we can help nonprofit organizations that may be serving needs that aren't served by the state right now to grow without having to go under the wing of big philanthropy organizations. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to figure out how to keep Maryland's innovation economy coming from Maryland and not have Maryland's innovation economy driven by corporations, which will be just as happy to leave Maryland, or federal dollars that may be going away. I also think that we need to keep investing in our schools, and that is not just a question of K through 12, but also our community colleges and our state colleges. One of the things that makes people want to move to Maryland, set up their business in Maryland, and innovate in Maryland is because we have an incredible school system. We have a school system from K to grad level that is really one of the top school systems in the country, and we need to keep investing in that. Finally, I think we need to make sure that we are, not using our tax credit dollars and things like that only to support corporations that may move here for a couple of years, but instead to incubate Maryland businesses that start here, that are rooted in our communities here, and that return their resources back to the communities from which they come. So look, we put together a agenda for a solidarity economy. And I think that agenda for a solidarity economy that includes things, like I said, cooperatives, public banking, things like that, and incubators is a good way to foster growth in Maryland, and especially in the places that may not be seeing the growth right now in Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, Northern Maryland. All of those places I think can really benefit from an investment of Maryland dollars into Maryland businesses for Maryland families and workers.
The Maryland General Assembly can be brutal, to say the least. As a Green Party governor, how would you work with the General Assembly in Annapolis?
Yeah. So first off, let me say this.
They just freeze you out,
They might, first off, let me say this. I'm not a rich or famous person. So if I win as a third party candidate, it will be because I have assembled a statewide coalition of folks with, as we like to say, the courage to imagine and the power to transform. So we'd be talking about a different political reality if I were to win. Like, it would be one thing if I was Jesse Ventura or something, and I could ride to the governor's office on my wrestling career and my movie career, but I'm not. So if I'm to win, it's going to be because the political transformation has already occurred, and a lot of Marylanders across party lines have already said that they believe in the priorities that we believe in. So if that happens, I think we're going to have a different set of political negotiations than we would have otherwise, because freezing me out freezes out all those Marylanders who voted for me. So that's the first part of it, is that if I win, we're going to be in a different world than we live in now. The second part is, look, I know we're going to have to negotiate. I'm not running for dictator. I'm not running for CEO. I'm running for governor, and that means we have to govern. That means we have to negotiate. We have to compromise. We have to work with the General Assembly. We have to work with the counties. And so we're going to do that. But also, one of the powers that the governor has in that setting is the power to veto things. And we're going to use that veto as we need to in order to make sure that the priorities that Marylanders put us into office for are being heard. The third thing I'll say about that is each year we're going to have a focused agenda of constitutional amendments that we ask the General Assembly to pass. And if the General Assembly is willing to pass those constitutional amendments in order to broaden the power of the vote, in order to protect the power of the vote, in order to expand the economic opportunity and things like that, if the General Assembly is willing to pass those constitutional amendments and put them in front of voters, then we're going to have a much better working relationship. If the General Assembly is not willing to pass those constitutional amendments, we're going to see a lot of veto fights. And I think that's kind of the way that the system is set up here in Maryland, and we're going to use it for that. The fourth thing I would say about this is I'm not afraid to use the emergency powers that exist for the governor in Maryland. And so we're going to use those powers as we can to address ongoing crises that the General Assembly refused to address. And the way that I see this happening is in the time that we're inaugurated, before the General Assembly starts, we're going to lay out a set of emergency priorities. And the General Assembly is going to have an opportunity to work on those priorities and work on solving them. Things like food deserts in West Baltimore, or things like environmental contamination in Curtis Bay, or things like lack of water in parts of Allegheny County. We're gonna declare an emergency. We're gonna ask the General Assembly to come up with a set of plans and solutions for it. And if they refuse to, then we're going to use our executive and emergency power in order to put the force of the state behind addressing those things. I don't want to do this in order to get in there and butt heads with the General Assembly all the time, but that's what democracy looks like in a multi-party system. It looks like compromise, it looks like consensus, and it looks like using the powers that the executive has in order to make sure things get done. So yeah, look, I don't think this is going to be easy. If we win, it's going to be, the hardest 4 years I've ever had in my life. And Bill Ferguson and Adrian Jones are going to make sure that it's hard and that I don't get to just push my agenda through. But I also think that a spirit of compromise, a spirit of consensus, and a spirit of addressing the priorities that Marylanders would have identified at that point pushes us forward and gives us an opportunity to do things that we've never been able to do before.
There's a third leg to most of the General Assembly sessions, and that's lobbyists. And there's a lot of them in Maryland and a lot of them in Annapolis that are active. How would you deal with that group of special interest lobbyists?
Yeah, so look, lobbyists, just like the General Assembly, are part of the system. We're going to have to deal with them. We can't ignore them entirely. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that people get together and have collective interests and appeal to the state about those collective interests. What we're not going to let them do is dictate our agenda. And we're not going to let them use their campaign donations, which are often a thing that they do, in order to try to force their will, to force their way on folks. That's not going to happen. What we will do is make sure that they have access like they do now. They can make their case. They can do things like that. But I think underlying this question is a question about campaign finance. And campaign finance is really where the lobbyists get a lot of their strength, because they can make donations to legislators, they can make donations to executives and things like that. And they can use those donations as a means of wielding power. I don't know that we can solve much of the campaign finance problems that, I think are nationwide and dictated at a federal level by a Supreme Court that's pretty lax on campaign finance. But what I do think we can do is I think we can use public financing of campaigns, candidates, parties, even ballot initiatives in order to counter some of the influence that lobbyists have via campaign finance. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking at campaign finance, at public financing as a means of trying to, broaden the group of people who get to have power and get to be in government. The third part about this, I think, is that we're going to really think about who has access to the people in government and power. One of the problems with lobbyists right now is that it feels a lot of times to most folks like those lobbyists have access to government and legislators, and regular people don't. And so one of the things that I'd love to do is institute a series of regular, probably monthly town halls to bring everyday Marylanders to the table in order to share their issues. Now, there's some really good academic research on ways to do this that are genuinely inclusive and genuinely shape the conversation with public input, as opposed to being sort of dog and pony political shows put on by a candidate and things like that. So we're going to bring some of those academics who are working on some of those excellent public engagement, public access, and public town hall solutions into the government and have them help us develop a set of town halls that allows each Marylander to hear different perspectives, to hear different ideas, and allows those selected to participate in town halls to really have the ear of the governor, of the legislature, and of the state agencies. I think these things all together help counter the power of lobbyists. Again, we're not going to make lobbyists go away, but if we can do things that empower folks that are not lobbyists to also have power and access, then I think that we set a stage for where the lobbyists are important and they have roles to play, but they're not they don't have the outsized role that they have right now.
Healthcare is a major issue around the country, and it ranges from the insurance part to the delivery part to the shortage of docs. What would you do about healthcare in our state of Maryland?
Yeah, so I think we're going to start off by saying that healthcare is a human right, and every person in Maryland should have access to the healthcare they need. That's the starting point. That's the value. That's the foundation of where we're going to go. From there, I think it becomes, it's a really complicated question, as you said. And it's one of the most complex issues states face, and it's pretty much downstream of the federal level. And so there's not a ton that states can do about some of these things, or at least to have massive structural change that would make it so that everybody had access. But at the same time, major reform seems to be stalled at the federal level. And so I would really like to work with the experts, the advocates, the people-based campaigns, and the legislature to come up with ways in order to make sure that Maryland is leading on the question of healthcare. I think that if we can have major investments in education, major investments in transit, and major investments in housing and healthcare, a lot of people will move here and want Maryland to be their home. And so I think the question here is, what can we do at a state level about this when most of it occurs at the federal level? And I think this is a challenge I'm excited to take on. I'm excited to work with the legislature for. And it's a thing that if we get right, will help Maryland grow and be a strong state, not just in the region, but in the nation.
For better or for worse, there's a lot of discussion about DEI programs. What's your view on DEI programs, and how would you support more state funding for DEI programs?
Yeah, so first, let me say, I think it's important to understand that DEI as a concept is really a corporate management strategy for dealing with diversity in the workforce. It is not a sort of radical restructuring. It is not redistribution. It is not reparation. We'll get to that in a second. But as a management tool to help manage diversity in the workforce, if Maryland agencies and people that are receiving funding from the state need help managing diversity in the workforce, absolutely we should invest in that. Absolutely we should help them with that. Now, I think the underlying this controversy is a concern about justice and history. And Maryland, like any other state, has a history of white supremacy, xenophobia, austerity politics, anti-labor politics, homophobia, transphobia, indigenous land theft. There's a lot of things that have happened in history. And a lot of these things are not just about how people feel or how they perceive world, but they're policy that structures outcomes that happened in the past and continue to structure outcomes that happen till today. So if we want a Maryland that works for everybody, we need to identify those policies that are at the root of the problems that create inequity, that create oppression, and that create other things like that. And so we need to, once we identify them, once we identify the roots, we need to change them. And then we need to invest in repairing that damage. And we need to understand that this is what justice and history look like. We have to repair the damages of the past. We have to name the damages of the past, and we have to be willing to do it. Now, repair and reparation can take multiple forms. That can include direct payments from the state and private institutions that have directly benefited from oppression. That can look like investment in community organizations indigenous to the communities that are in need of that repair. But we must repair the damage done by policy of the past and of the present. And if we don't do that, then we're not going to have a Maryland that can work for everybody, and we're not going to have a Maryland where any form of justice is possible. Now, politically, what's interesting about this is what I just said is what conservatives think Democrats want to do. But Democrats really are just about managing diversity in the workforce. And they oftentimes will say that they're not about the repair. They're not about the reparation. They're not about the reallocation. And they use that to avoid the debate. Well, one thing I will promise is we will not avoid this debate. We will have this debate with conservatives. We will have this debate with moderates. We will have this debate with liberals. We'll have this debate with anybody, because we believe that if we want a Maryland that works for everybody, we have to repair the harms of the past and reinvest in the communities that have been damaged.
Andy, what's your position on the state's involvement in high school and lower school curriculum? You think there's a role there or not?
Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of discussion about this, and it focuses on a lot of issues of race, gender, and sexuality, and things like that. And I think these are important things that need to be wrestled with. One of the things that I think is great for me about spending so much time around educators is that I have a great group of folks that I will be able to turn to as governor on this question and seek guidance on it. But let me say a couple of things about the issue broadly. First, aside from those hot button cultural issues that oftentimes take up the curriculum space, we need to start thinking about what it looks like to have multilingual schools. Maryland has a large immigrant population, and it is going to continue to have a growing immigrant population. And a part of the curriculum discussion that doesn't happen enough is how we start shaping our curriculum to deal with the fact that most of our schools in Maryland are increasingly multilingual. My friend Owen Silverman Andrews and I had a great podcast last year about this question. And I would really like to make sure that if I'm governor, one of the things we focus on is making sure that the curriculum is accounting for the reality of multilingual schools. Second thing I would say about this is I think mostly this stuff happens at the local level. I think for the most part that the school boards, elected school boards, should be the last decider on what happens in public schools outside of general provisions handed down by the state. And the people need to contest local school board elections. Local school boards are important, they matter. And I think that for public schools, they should be the level of decision making that is most accessible to the people in the community, but also has the most authority to set policy across the schools. The last thing I would say about this is, while I don't think we should make it easy for people to opt out of public school curriculum, I do think we should make it much easier for people to do things like form homeschooling cooperatives. There was a really good article in the Baltimore Banner recently about how more and more Black Marylanders are taking advantage of homeschooling cooperatives, homeschooling networks, and things like that. And I think it's important to support that innovation, not just for Black folks, but for people across the state and of all sorts of political persuasions. And now I say this because I think that public schools should be a public good. I don't think the parents should really be opting out of curriculum in public schools, but I do think if parents want to start educating their children in a different way, that they should have the ability to do that. Now, I think that's going to be a difficult discussion to have, because we have to make sure that the education standards and the health and the welfare of the young people are being met, and we have to make sure that it's not taking away from public school dollars. But if we can do that, I think we can have a pretty good setup where elected school boards make decisions on a local level about what some of the issues are with guidance from the state. And then if parents don't like that and want to have a different emphasis in their education, they can look into homeschooling networks that are supported outside of public education dollars. So look, I think this is a complicated thing. I think the parents, students, teachers, schools, communities all need to be at the table around this. But I do think the best way to address this is to allow the state to set some general guidelines, to allow elected school boards to decide what's going to happen in their community, and to make it so that it is possible for folks who want to opt out of that system.
Does that include issues with some counties and jurisdictions are taking a look at student usage of cell phones? Maybe that's too narrow, but what do you think of that?
Yeah, so I think this is a huge issue for all the teachers that I talk to, all the students I talk to, and all the parents I talk to. And I think what we're going to need to do is let the local school boards and the local school administrations start to work out what their policies are going to be on it. The needs may be different in Montgomery County than they are in Baltimore City, than they are in St. Mary's County, than they are in Garrett County. And so I think the first round of this issue is to allow each locality to start working out what it needs in order to deliver for its parents, its students, its educators, and its communities. And then they need to come to the state and see what the state, what assistance the state can provide for that. So if they need state legislation at a local level in order to empower local school boards to restrict cell phone usage, great, we should do that. If they need funding for devices that they can use to lock up the phones because the local school board has decided on it, then great, we should go with that. I think this is an issue that is going to get worked out. Parents, students, teachers, school boards are going to work it out. And the state needs to be there to provide assistance to the local entities that are trying to figure out the best solution for their locale. I don't think a one-size-fits-all solution is necessarily the best way to go about it for a state with as diverse of communities as Maryland has. And this is one of those places where if the state's job can be to help the localities, I think that will be the best solution.
Retiring West Virginia Senator Manchin agrees with you and the Green Party that there should be other party choices. But he said in an interview recently that he wants to start an American party. That's what he wants to call it. And that he would envision that being included voters who are disenfranchised with Republican or Democratic or others. Would the Green Party support such an effort and endeavor, or do you want to continue to remain the Green Party?
Well, we certainly support such an effort and endeavor. If Joe Manchin wants to form an independent party called the American Party, I'm all for that. I think a world of more parties is a world of better parties. But let me take a step back there and talk a little bit about third parties in the United States and how they work. There are three kinds of third parties in the United States that I identify. One is a single issue party, and that is a party that comes about because of prohibition or because of slavery or because of voting irregularities or something like that. And their job and their goal is to influence the two parties in order to, take on their issue. There's another type of third party that is like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party that is an ideological party. And their problem with the two-party system is that the two parties are too similar and don't represent a wide enough perspective of viewpoints. And their job is to sort of widen the perspective of people who are represented in government. There's a third type of party, and this is what Joe Manchin is talking about, that is a sort of anti-partisan, good government party of the center. And these parties see the problem of the two-party system as one in which there are two polarized parties that fight too much in order to get stuff done. And so their goal is to add a party of the center that can focus on consensus and compromise. I think all three of those models make sense. And I think what Joe Manchin is proposing is really the third model of that. And I'm good with it as long as it includes the ability, includes the type of electoral reforms that allow Greens and Libertarians and Prohibition and other type of parties to thrive. If what Joe Manchin wants to do is to replace a two-party system with a three-party system in which he is the third party, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in a multi-party system that fosters more consensus, more participation in government, and more people feeling like their views are represented by the government. I think when we have a system like that, it encourages people to be involved, to be engaged, and to care about what happens. When we have a system in which people don't feel represented, they turn to means outside of government, they drop out of the system altogether, or they stop caring about what government does. So the short answer to that is I encourage Joe Manchin and anybody else to work on forming a party to address the problems of the two-party system. But the longer answer is we need to build a multi-party system and not replace a two-party system with a three-party system. We need to have more voices represented and a plurality of ideas so that more consensus can occur.
With that in mind, where do you see the Green Party in Maryland in 5 years, say?
Yep. So, I think that's a great question. So we're talking 5 years. We're talking the end of the year of 2029. So let's think about what happens between now and 29. I think in 2026, we're going to run candidates up and down the ballot and across the state. We're going to focus on strong candidates in the publicly financed county council races. So that's Howard, Montgomery, Baltimore County, and Prince George's. And we're hopefully going to advance a coordinated platform that pushes values and solutions that neither party is bringing to those counties right now. And, I hope we will have people in each of those counties qualify for public financing so that they can have a well-funded campaign that goes through the general election and raises those issues that are being ignored or being silenced right now. It includes the people who've left behind and the people who are left out of Maryland's success. And I think if we're successful at doing that in 2026, we will build the power. We will build on that power for 2028 and we'll go into 2030 with a strong opportunity to change outcomes in line with our values. Changing outcomes in line with our values is really why we do this. And that may include getting people elected to office in the 2030 election at the county level or at the state level or something like that. But I think this year we start a process of laying a really strong foundation of values and solutions that are not being addressed by either party at the county level. And we use the public financing mechanism in order to get that message out there. So that's the local level. At the state level, I also want to run candidates across the state, and I want to run state senate and state delegate candidates across Maryland in districts that are either too red for the Democrats to care about or too blue for the Republicans to care about, so that voters have an option that represents their views. I also want to run candidates in the purple districts and really challenge the two parties that may both be leaving folks behind. So at the local level, we want to focus on those public financing counties. At the state level, we want to run people in every legislative district. And at the federal level, I'm really inspired by New Jersey, where they had a Green candidate in every congressional election in 2024. They had a Senate candidate, and then in each of New Jersey's 12 congressional districts, they had a candidate. And I'd love to see us be able to replicate that here in Maryland. Look, if we are going to be the kind of party that can have the courage to imagine and the power to transform, we're going to need to be able to be a much more and better organized party. We're going to need to do more than just petition for our own existence every 4 years. We're going to need to build grassroots connections and communities across the state. We're going to need to have a strong vision of what a Maryland looks like, and we're going to need to have a plan to get there. And part of the reason that I'm running this race is because I believe that I have the capability to help bring that based on my experience in the Green Party, my experience in the corporate and tech world, and my experience in academic debate. I think we can envision a world that is different than this one. We can have the courage to imagine what it looks like, and we can have the power to transform it so that Maryland is different and that the people who are left behind can experience a Maryland that works for everybody.
Some in Baltimore and Annapolis and elsewhere have suggested that were you a Democrat, you'd already be in elected office. How do you respond to that? How does that make you feel?
Well, I am very flattered to hear that people think so highly of me. But if I thought that I could run as a Democrat and make the kind of change that we've talked about in this interview, I would consider doing it. But I don't think we can. I don't think that having another progressive Democrat in the General Assembly or another progressive Democrat in the Baltimore City Council is going to change the structure that we have right now. I think in order to change the outcomes that we have right now, we need to change the structure. And I think that means having a multi-party system in which more views and more ideas are represented, more consensus is necessary, and more compromise is required. So I appreciate folks that think that I could succeed as a Democrat, and I might even be able to get some of the policy things that I like across the finish line, but I see our work as transformative. I see our work as transforming the political system and transforming the political reality, and I don't think that can happen by running as a Democrat. And if I did, and if I changed my mind on that, I would sign up as a Democrat. I love the Green Party. I believe it's a great vehicle for doing the work that I think is necessary, but I am not sort of ride or die for the Green Party. I am a person who believes that the outcomes are what matter, and the best vehicle we have right now in order to get those outcomes is a multi-party system where a party like the Green Party is one of multiple healthy parties.
You told me once that you were at a campaign event in Silver Spring, and a lady said to you, "Wow, you're dangerous because you're a Green that's not crazy." How did that make you feel, and how do you react to that?
I mean, look, any political party has a lot of people who are really committed to the ideas and to the values that they have. The Green Party has less people who are just sort of rank and file supporters to separate those folks who are very committed to the project from the rest of the folks. So I think oftentimes it looks like the Green Party has more outlandish or crazy people in it. But I don't know. I've met some Democrats and some Republicans and some libertarians that are pretty outlandish, pretty crazy, pretty committed. I think what is important is allowing people to see a vision of a Green Party that is actually trying to change outcomes and that is actually trying to address concerns that regular Marylanders have. And I think once they see that and they see a theory of action behind it and they see people who believe in it and they see organization that matches the imagination, then they're going to stop saying things like that as a nice thing and start saying things like that as a mean thing. There's, typically the way that it goes for third parties is they go through 3 stages of a life cycle. The first part is everybody pats them on the head and says, oh, isn't it nice that you're participating in democracy? Because they know that they have no chance of changing anything. They have no chance of succeeding. So they're nice and happy to see them there. The second part is when they start to believe that they could impact the effectiveness of the major party, they start to ignore them. So we go from patting you on the head and saying, isn't it nice that you're here, to ignoring you and pretending you don't exist. And the third stage is to attack. And they start attacking once they recognize that their power is threatened and once they recognize that their grip on the ability to shape reality is threatened. And so, I sort of see that woman with that comment. I see her in stage 1 of this development. She's still patting me on the head and saying how nice it is that I'm here. And if we start really having a strong campaign, she's going to pretend we don't exist and we don't matter. And if we really start threatening the democratic power base that she believes in, then she's going to start attacking and telling us, why we're wrong. And that's fine. That's a debate. That's democracy. In a debate and in democracy, political parties punch hard. They try to make sure that the other person doesn't win. They try to make sure that they can maintain power. And I'm more than excited to get to that stage of the development of the Green Party in Maryland and get beyond the pat on the head stage and get on the ignore stage.
We've talked about a lot of issues here, some pretty heavy issues, but voters, when they get to the voting booth, they don't necessarily think about all those issues. What 3 things do you want voters to think about Andy Ellis when they go to the polls? Yeah.
So, I think that they want to know that I show up and that I'm going to show up for them. They need to know that I'm committed to justice and that I'm committed to repairing the damage of the past so that we can have opportunity, peace, and democracy in the future. And they need to know that I'm committed to building a multi-party Maryland that is there for them and there for the generations to come. So look, I'm going to be there. I'm going to show up. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to make sure that the people who feel left behind feel like they have somebody who is there to care for them. I'm going to make sure that we don't waver on our commitment to justice. And I'm going to make sure that we build a world in which it is possible to imagine multiple parties thriving in Maryland so that it can work for everybody.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that I didn't ask you?
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This has been a great opportunity to be on the other side of my podcast, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it goes. January 4th, we will be in Annapolis doing the launch of our campaign. We're going to have a bunch of folks from different social justice and community organizing efforts together, and we're going to start envisioning what that kind of new politics in Maryland looks like. And I'd love to have folks come out, join us. It's going to be a cold day, but I think we together, we will keep each other warm, we will keep each other safe, and we will keep each other hopeful about the possibility of a world that is different. Our campaign slogan is that we need to have the courage to imagine and the power to transform. And I think that we are ready to do that. I think we are ready to show Maryland that it can be different, that we don't have to accept the way that it is, that we don't have to accept business as usual, and that we don't have to stay the course. As Glenn Ross, who I ran with in 2018, used to say, our goal is to change the game. And I think on January 4th, we're going to start to change the game here in Maryland so that people can envision a better future for themselves, their families, and their communities. I'd love to see folks come out. And then in 2025, we're going to build infrastructure and organization across the state so that everybody in Maryland knows they have a Green Party choice going into 2026. They know what the issues are, they know what the values are, and they know what the solutions are. And I'm so excited to get started with this campaign. I think it's a great opportunity, and I think it's going to I think we're going to change the game. I think we're going to transform Maryland, and I think we're going to show that the power of our imagination can bring about a new world and a better world.
Thank you for allowing me to be part of this session. I'll see you on the 4th.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning into this very special episode of my podcast. It was so awesome to be able to get interviewed by my dad about our campaign and what is coming next. I love to see you all on the 4th. Check out our website. We're getting a lot done on it, gogreen2026.com. We're also planning out this season of the podcast. So look forward for more of me being in the interviewing chair coming up pretty soon. We're going to find a new group of advocates and activists and academics and other folks who are excited about this transformative vision of Maryland. So thank you all so much. Thank you to my dad, and thank you to Dana, my wife and producer, for making sure that the show ran right. And we'll see you all on the 4th.